Speaking of getting to the news, and the news is police violence here, let's get to some of the big updates that happened while the show was on vacation. The biggest one being, of course, that the NYPD, the New York Police Department, again showed why they are, in my opinion, actually dangerous. And look, I flat out think the NYPD are dangerous. And frankly, the NYPD scares the crap out of me. They do. And look, I am a white dude who lives several hundred miles away from New York City, and the New York Police Department literally scare the bejesus out of me. So let's get a little background here on the latest news here. So after the death of Eric Garner at the hands of the NYPD that choked him to death, New York Mayor Bill DeBlasio, who has, many of you will know, he has a black wife and a biracial son, he actually said the following after Eric Garner was killed. He said, quote, because Shirlane and I have had to talk to Dante for years about the dangers he may face, a good young man, a law-abiding young man who would never do anything wrong, and yet because of a history that still hangs over us, the dangers he may face, we've had to literally train him, as families have all over this city for decades, in how to take special care in any encounter he has with the police officers who are there to protect him, end quote. So, look, that's not a controversial statement. That's really not a controversial statement at all. This is actually something every responsible parent of a person of color has to do when they're talking about cops around the country. They have to tell them they have to be more careful. That's the fact. That really isn't controversial. It's controversial that exists in our country. That should be controversial, but it's the norm, right? But so the NYPD freaked out about it. Ex-Mayor Rudy Giuliani freaked out about it. All these right-wingers freaked out about it. How dare de Blasio say that his son might be in danger of racist cops killing him? So then fast forward, we had no indictment of the officer who killed Michael Brown. We had no indictment of the officer who choked Eric Garner to get to death in New York City. All the time, all the while, as we talked about, and as I'm sure you know, the Black Lives Matter protests continue. Fast forward to late December, and I'm sure you've heard by now that a mentally disturbed man who is in Baltimore first shot his girlfriend, which that actually hasn't gotten a whole lot of coverage either, that the fact that this man, shot another person who was not a cop. But then he was in Baltimore, he shot his girlfriend, then he traveled to New York City where he shot and killed two New York City police officers in Brooklyn, before then going down to a subway station and turning the gun and killing himself, which is horrific and terrifying and tragic and horrible. Later on that night, the head of the New York Police Union, the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, a man named Patrick Lynch, who we have in fact talked about on this show before, he said the following. He said, quote, "There's blood on many hands tonight. Those that incited violence on the street under the guise of protest, that tried to tear down what New York City police officers did every day. We tried to warn it must not go on. It cannot be tolerated. That blood on the hands starts on the steps of City Hall and in the office of the mayor." End quote. We'll get back to the fact that there's blood on the hands of protesters against police violence. But let's start with City Hall here. So, for voicing a very legitimate fear that his black son could be targeted and killed by police for doing nothing wrong, according to the NYPD, there's blood on Mayor de Blasio's hands for just mentioning that. Just mentioning that very real fear. By showing any sympathies to the protesters against police violence, there's blood on de Blasio's hands. There's blood on the hands of the protesters. So if you're someone who went to a Black Lives Matter protest, anywhere not just New York, heck, around the country. I went to ones here in Boston. If you went to one in Chicago, if you went to one in Omaha, if you went to one anywhere, there's blood on your hands, according to the NYPD. If you care about black lives, who we don't value here in the United States of America, black lives who can be stomped out and then have no accountability for the cops who killed them, there's blood not on the cops' hands who killed those innocent unarmed people, but there's blood on your hands. How sick is that? How sick is that logic? How twisted is that logic? News outlets also reported that the police union, the Benevolent Association, was actually circulating a memo to all its members, which literally it called for the end of enforcement and arrests for minor offenses. The memo, that part was a little wonky, but this part actually read, quote, I'm going to go back to this blood dripping thing. The memo also said, quote, the mayor's hands are literally dripping with blood because of his words, actions, and policies, and we have, for the first time in a number of years, become a, quote, wartime police department. We will act accordingly, end quote. So the NYPD, the New York Police Department, is a wartime police department? A wartime police department. I mean, look, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, he used to refer to the NYPD as his own personal private army. He really did that. You can look it up. We talked about it on the show. He called them his private army. But now, the NYPD is actually, they're going to war with the current mayor, all because he dared show some fear for his son's life and the willingness to listen to the tens of thousands of New York citizens and protesters who protested because so many New Yorkers, people of color, live under the constant threat of police violence without any accountability. And look, as I said in the memo, the police union said that the NYPD cops are going to stop enforcing low-level crimes. Reading from the New York Times, traffic citations had fallen by 94% under the same period last year. Summonses for offenses like public drinking and urination were down 94%. Parking violations down 92%. Drug arrests by the Organized Crime Control Bureau was down 84%, end quote. Honestly, when I hear that, on a lot of levels, I actually think, good. You know what? Good. Cops are harassing people less. Most of these people are poor and probably of color anyway, so the fact that they're probably arresting people for things that really aren't that serious to begin with, you know what? Good. But so on that level, good, because people are being harassed less, and there's actually a couple articles that have been written on how that's actually probably helping poor people more. But again, though, just in theory of this, how wild is that, though? Cops are protesting and literally getting paid and not doing their jobs because the mayor expressed fears for his son. How wild is that? How sick and kind of and scary is that? And I'm sure you've heard by now, moving on, at the funeral for one of the police officers who was killed, the family of the slain officer asked Mayor DeBlasio to speak at the funeral, and when he did, thousands of NYPD cops literally turned their backs on him at a funeral. The NYPD cops are protesting at a funeral. I'm not the first person to say this. Many people have pointed this out. You know who else protests at funerals? I can think of one. The Westboro Baptist Church. Those guys, those monsters, the Westboro Baptists. And who else? That's about it. Westboro Baptist and the NYPD. That's literally the two I can think of. Those are the monsters who protest at funerals at a time of mourning. The other slain officer's family also asked the mayor to speak at the funeral. And Police Chief Bill Bratton, who, by the way, we've talked about on the show, is actually the architect of stop and frisk. And a lot of us are actually upset that de Blasio picked Bratton as his police chief. But Bratton actually, he asked the officers publicly, do not politicize a funeral. Please don't protest at this funeral because it's a funeral. Please don't protest at a funeral. But then, at the funeral, when the mayor spoke, guess what happened? Of course, thousands of police officers, again, turned their backs on the mayor at a bloody funeral. Protesting at a funeral. Who was against the speaker who was invited both times by the victim's family. They're spitting in the eye of the victim's family there. Spitting in there on the casket of the victim's family there. Real classy. Real bloody classy NYPD. So in between that, in between the two funerals, de Blasio was booed at an NYPD graduation ceremony. I mean, these guys are literally just became cops, and they're already booing de Blasio. I mean, it's crazy, man. It's frightening as hell. And look, let me just be a little clear here. I do believe all workers do have the right to protest. I really do. But I'll be honest with you here. What the NYPD are protesting, it scares the crap out of me. It really does. I mean, remember this. This is the same NYPD that, in addition to the normal harassment and fear they dish out to communities of color on a daily basis in New York City, in addition to the level of fear and anxiety that that people of color have to live in when they live there at the hands of these cops. This is the same NYPD that has body armor and tanks and riot gear. This is the same NYPD that illegally spied on Muslims, not just in New York City, New York State, and other states. They're a local police force that spied on people in different states. That spied on protesters who beat up and pepper sprayed protesters. They literally are actually an army who apparently is going to war. And apparently they're perfectly fine being an army, going to war, attacking and going to war against the elected official who is the executive of the city that's in charge of him because he fears for his son's safety. That's scary, folks. That's really scary. Knowing the amount of access they actually have to phone records and the spying that they do through things like the NSA, the NYPD is definitely tied into the NSA. I wouldn't put anything past the NYPD. This is scary stuff. And the way they've been acting, it just goes to show again, how we so need to have such a serious conversation on the role of not just the NYPD, but literally all police departments here in the United States of America. Are the police officers supposed to be peacekeepers, or are they an army? Look at the NYPD. I think you know what the answer is. We'll be right back.